Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound. 1. Nature, the Perceptive Field. Where to begin with what rounds on itself a skein of endless complex, as if Heraclitus metabalon anapoetai, hurled about it draws to rest, were crisscrossed, augmented and diminished, within and without, interfused like water glints, like the cries of frogs. But that is to have begun already, with uncertainty, the amorphous swim of a tropic stream. Thales, all things come from water. Goethe's homunculus in the wide sea. And what other source do we find if we grope systematic thought to its pre-child or prehistoric origins, organic body to Harvey's embryonic pulse? Suns and worlds to the turbulence of galactic foam, that chaos which seems in Genesis either God's first work or the primal dark on which his spirit moves. In art, that all beginning may have waited for the end, the dream erotic meltings of Mallarmé's faun, on the air drowsy with tufted slumbers, Rimbaud's Le Poème de la Mer, infusé d'astres et lac des sons, that sea infused with stars and lactescent, to which Debussy gave tone color, in painting what swirls through this post-impressionist Monet, symbolist Redon, the Fauves, to the whirlpool abstracts of Kandinsky's Jugendstil. The commitment of early art, as of early music and thought, had been to the crystalline, as if what it took to rear a culture out of nature, Egyptian, classical, this Renaissance nymph from a fountain by Goujon, or the lute fantasies of Francesco da Milano, were the eternal clarity of reason, to set a temple of Parian marble over the hydra flux. The Greeks had expressed it forever, the sheer wonder of form's discovery. For that shared logos of the intelligible we would almost risk all. But we can no more rest our thought on that Acropolis than in the reed bed of the faun. All history exists, and we carry it in our cells. We are not our own embryos sculpting instinctive walls. The senses fell or were channeled before we were men, mammals, reptiles, while we were still awash in the Cambrian seas. Nor is it with the bare senses that we perceive. There is the lidless eye of Palomar, the radio parabolas of mile-long arrays, of which computers are the sorting nerves, scan the sky for quasars and black holes of cosmic death and origin. Even the tropic pool opens to the recess that terrified Pascal and delighted Leibniz with the suspension of structure within structure forever, the microscopic stare of live automatons. Surely the first, though almost mind-dissolving task of every fresh art and thought is to yield to the breathing of that organically transformed Pythagorean void. Void enters into the heaven itself from the infinite air, as though the heavens were breathing, and this void defines the natures of things. Then, on the liquid interface, one sees circles, geometric waves that spread in the very flux of universal water. A calculable curve has arisen from the amorphous itself, its propagated sinusoids, the cancellate of whatever countless indeterminacies give the molecular slide of fluidity. Clear as the cut of an archaic Apollo, Euclid smiles over the surface of the Heisenberg pool. Focus down like Leeuwenhoek. Somewhere in the water you find Volvox, at the divide between Proto and Metazoan. Whip your reason like the black horse. Tell it nameable divisions are not lost because they fuse. You behold the root antinomy of one and many, over which mind and nature have been stretched from the start. The sphere of cohesive oneness, yet visibly many, a colony of flagellate eye-spot cells, such the granules you see glistening, while the entelechy, barely taking up seat in and over them, reproduces itself, those dark seedlings of other colonies that swell until they break the mother sphere. So death came into the world, another polarity thrust upon us before its time, in one sense real, in another merely the abstracted limits of the life-death field. We have looked into the pond for a globe smaller than Pascal's smallest mite. Now into space, if not for the largest, large enough, the globular cluster in Hercules, part of our galactic system, only 40,000 light-years away, with several 100,000 stars, the brighter giants like Betelgeuse, even the faintest seen larger and brighter than our sun. Consider the tug in and out of a configured thing. Contrary desires in a one are insoluble. Tension in substance is transrational. Thought must resolve that paradox in the one many, no other road, and for the senses world structure everywhere concurs. As one matter the whole is drawn in, as many stars accelerated by that entropic fall together, it fights entropy, thrusts out. The resultant is a pulsing boundary in space. The same with an atom, molecule, elastic billiard ball. Lucretius' indissoluble atoms could never have been validated for force interplay. If he had known the axiomatic field, he could have proved his atoms mystical. So, as our search deepens, what were called atoms, then primary particles, sign their dissolving. An interplay of parts, the whole from bottom to top, workingly aswim. The many and one, even of the soul, which Plato suspends over the whole of the Republic. Thus the alchemists, melting ancient and Eastern experience in the alembic of mythic science, visualized the fusion of androgynous opposites as fixed and volatile in the clutch of the blue eagle rising over the heap of its own dead aurora consurgens. So music rises from the tensile one many of vibrating ratios, that art which more than all others imitates the universe itself, as if from this bowed and sounding metal plate, where salt grains have danced into the still nodes between overtone waves, those damped chords you hear above the fundamental, the whole interplay of harmony, was stretching acoustic space from the tugs of dissonance, ratios forever jagged and incommensurate, toward the proportioned accords of Pythagorean 1 and 2, 2 and 3, but so sensuously embodied that in a Gesualdo cadence our very guts are entrained in the raging desire and fulfillment of Schopenhauer's primordial being. The departure of modern from classical, that is, post-Socratic intelligence, is clear. For the ancients, paradox is reason's shipwreck. For a modern, the polar delineation of its natural field. Whatever clarity we draw from the amorphous becomes the pole of an antinomy. If that, for the claimants of cosmos order, puts the mind in a bind, like the horned angle Euclid set up as a pillared mark beyond which human daring should not seek. For us of the infinite and infinitesimal, it is not an end but a beginning, not a tie-up but a calling. Through all seasons the red and green leaves of the madrone flaunt those metabolic opposites, photosynthesis and digestion, which every plant to some degree combines. We might assault the tree. Do you build up or tear down? You can't have it both ways. Why don't you decide? It grows in the vast abrupt between. Indeed, Aristotle was warm when he wrote of the Meno paradox of learning. The soul is so constituted as to be capable of this process. But nature, too, is constituted for high process. If not, soul would not be here. The rainbow covenant of no total flood is written in water. It reads, forms are emergent, though between form and emerge the copula is contradiction. Here the nameable states, distinct to our very senses, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, which we round on the color wheel like the musical octave, whereas in the continuum the extremes disappear into ultraviolet and infrared. These colors, the Pythagorean tones, the God-given numbers, all resonant responses, crown the relative with absolute emergence from degree. And that spectrum is mathemable. Who would not wonder at such beauty's formulable slide? Pascal says, there are no limits in things. Laws would put them there, and the mind cannot suffer it. But both nature and mind would limit, and both can and cannot allow it to themselves. Born to flux, can thought only solidify? Aristotle's analytics, matter and form, nature and art. Kant's experience consists of intuitions which belong to the sensibility, and of judgments which are entirely a work of the understanding. One pretends to think that way, makes a brave show, but is it not dried up from the start? As Nietzsche laughed at poor old Kant, how are synthetic a priori judgments possible? And what was actually his answer? By virtue of a virtue, but unfortunately not in 5 words. If thinking with a capital T turns out impossible, Pascalian despair is not the only answer. Water skaters skate on water. They use indeed the plasticity and surface tension which make those ripples models for the equational physics of electricity and magnetism. But if water and solid are not the polarity of free and bound, what is? Does the antinomy of determinism against sponte sua equally characterize all things? How could it? Billiard ball physics is real. Living choice is real. There is a gradient of predictability as between crystals and leaves. Just so in nature the undergirding of number comes to the surface, crops out as from the amorphous mottling of vines. We say by statistical cancellation, but it was here the ancients seated gods and angelic intelligences in the regularity of the stars. Here too Galilean physics contrived those equations which have lured all knowledge in their wake, while the universe of flow and growth laps those rocks like water, weaves over them like fronds. God forbid, said Blake, that knowledge should be limited to mathematical demonstration. Within rock only, and not all rock, but the rock element made by fire, of like mineral composition, and from the same region runs the pentad from glassy obsidian center, blown from a volcano, cooled so fast it has no time to find the lattices of solid. Lower left, basalt, the same lava flowing out, cooled in mass, amorphous. Left and above, intrusive granite, its quartz, feldspar, and mica, under slower earth cooling, sorted out like salt and pepper. Diagonally below, pegmatite, that granite under long heat and pressure enlarging its separate crystals. Then upper right, gneiss, just such a granite buried and remelted deep under, pulled and stressed like taffy, showing in igneous rock the fluid lines of water. Pascalian despair among the fathomless inventions of nature? Those fire rocks come to the surface, rains and streams wash them down. Out of clay and sand and the lime-gathering seas, new rocks are made, sedimentary. But now, like an alluvial stream, oxbow bending in the figure of 8 infinite curves, whatever water has shaped bears the print of water. Even when mottled limestone, touched again by intrusive fire, crystallizes in the branching tongues of marble. Wherever polarities are set up by us or nature, they have continually to be swallowed in one, mirrored, reversed, transcended, or polarity itself falls into a stasis, like Pascal's skeptic Arcesilaus, who, by holding to his skepticism, became a dogmatist. But mind and nature have deep, inescapable axioms. As Wallace said of age, the seas are calm when the winds give o'er. And Aristotle, surely the substratum cannot cause itself to move. That axiom, which physics calls the second law of thermodynamics, or entropy, is Eleatic. At Elea, they gave it unconditioned, the logic of identity, that being remains what it is. Applied to process, it became impractical. Since no being can come from non-being or go into another being, change cannot exist. We hedge and fudge, but never escape the hydra of the axiom, as that no substance, conceived as one, can stir itself. The ocean needs the wind, and if the wind should die, as here on the Pacific, the waves work less and less. Ah, but the contrary axiom enters, for the mind is stretched over more antinomies than Kant troubled himself with, that disparates cannot interact. The contrary is validated for interplay only as subsumed under the one. If wind and water were not matter in motion, neither could affect the other. Now they are one again, and the substratum cannot cause itself to move. The closed system comes to rest. Sunlight must be brought in to touch it off, the vector of impingement. But if light and matter are not kindred energies, both electromagnetic, there is no means of contact. The blend dies again. That heat death, which rational physics extrapolates from closed systems and from half the axiom to the unformulable whole. Better the Chinese 14th century Yen Hui, who painted waves as spirit, mystical self-movers, at once the matter and impinging power. But what else has the physicist done, unwittingly, with that all-pervading and vitalizing flow of energy, both substratum and élan vital? He may repudiate the words, but how to characterize a cosmos of infinite energy transformations under paradox, each parcel in its descent thrusting up another or returning in its own gyre, where total mass release attends the relativity sink of a black hole? In this exploding galaxy M82 in the Big Bear, where hydrogen filaments spread 14,000 light-years above and below the galaxy from some collapse and mass conversion of innumerable suns 1.5 million years ago, will the habit of living in a gravitational field instruct us which transfers of energy in that curved space are up and which down? Since our whole experience is like the image reversals in confronting mirrors, here a two-sided plaque my Mexican albanil gave me, Christ and athlete, alternate forever. Pascal pursues such dipoles, but not far enough. They do not know that it is the chase and not the quarry which they seek. Reflected again, the quarry validates the chase. As Erasmus had said, thus all things are presented by shadows, yet this play is put on in no other way. And what of a world evolved by such play? Suppose Kant's antinomies are reflected back on his prior reasoning. His certainty that the order of the appearances we entitle nature we ourselves introduce becomes one of Maxwell's asymptotes. The only laws of matter are those which our minds must fabricate, and the only laws of mind are fabricated for it by matter. Asymptotes abstracted from the temporal curve. The first division might seem of self and other, though until Descartes went into that room with the stove, no one had done much with it. It has come easy since, but not every subjective doubt pulls from the Eleatic axiom, self as eternal thinking substance, world as formulable and extended substance, both secured by God as infinite substance and eternal rational cause, and all with the unanswerability of Euclid, so long as the equations are not held to the sliding ambiguities of any actual self, doubt, or world. Of course the Eleatic principle is true. Causal reasoning rests on it. But in Pascal's quaint phrase, the conclusions are false, because the opposite principles are also true. If only Pascal had leapt from there to the eureka that in bearing the irreducible polarities of soul and body, essence and relationship, one and many, particle and field, he had made a first move toward showing existence as creatively adaptive within the antinomies of the perceptive ground. For against the Eleatic axiom, in causal form, Descartes' proof that his own reason must come from a reasoning God, since what is cannot be produced by what is not, we cannot deny that the whole reasoning content of the world has evolved through Silurian seas, where the highest and brainiest were lungfish and ganoids, primitive as the belching armor-plated prehistoric gar, though to watch him gorge, dumped in a minnow bucket upside down, is to grant his life urge. We need not ask the fetus to know, in every consciousness, the change of state and flux of form, for which Leibniz defined perception as the passing and manifold in the one and simple. It was that coming to be of what was not that drove Kierkegaard, desperate Eleatic, to mediate the creative by the one allowed ex nihilo, the birth of the eternal in time. But that moment is everywhere, and everywhere decisive, if everywhere causally prepared. The cosmic breath and emergence is the death-birth of God. Thus reason stretches over the field of fact. Hegel, all out for generation in time, keeps one dialectic foot, like the old oyster in Alice, firmly in the oyster bed. Spirit is immortal, an essential now. The grades it seems to have left behind, it still possesses in the depths of its present. When sperm, which mill about until the egg is sensed, and then our soul is restless until it rest in thee, turn heads all one way up the long stream, like salmon, are they purposive? It would be foolish, says Aristotle, to deny purpose because we do not see the agents deliberating. Where then does purpose stop? Do stripped homunculi bear the organic future? Which one of each 200 million? We can only answer yes, and then again no. Demonstrable purpose proves almost purposeless. I'm going to move that book, and I do. But creative purpose is the knowledge groped for in the Meno, unknown my own. As embryology repeats phylogeny, Beethoven's Opus 111 coda relives his sketchbook gropings for the revealed. How can purpose repeat? How modulate the currents of predictive mass? 40 years ago, in a valley by a stream, I watched a flight of grackles from a tree. I saw stream, clouds, winds, and light swept down in the formidable currents of Carnot's law. But the tree rose, building with light into leaves. Birds fountained up the air, vent adorns Lauzetta, heightening desire into song. Was it the old Emersonian rapture, and striving to be man, the worm mounts through all the spires of form? I needed a base in physics, and there it was at the heart of Newton's laws, as simple as inertia, motion self-opposed. I wrote, all matter, systems, worlds, and living things express the need of energy to buttress against its own decay. In this sense, cosmic history is a heightening and unfolding of the perceptive ambivalence of energy, that its activity is the fall by which it dies, its life in time, a transcendence using and used by the destructive urge. When the buck antelope Uganda cob lunges forward, spurning the ground, Earth's rotation is proportionately changed. When he leaps up, Earth's lesser leap down rocks the universe on minute gravitational waves. If two come together, the system is balanced in the dynamics of elastic rebound. Then they lock horns, slightly splaying the ground in static strain. They ride a mathematical clockwork, not only those creatures, but the muscles cunningly flexed on the hinged and levered bones. No wonder, as Bacon said, knowledge becomes power. Here the polarity of sex is organized over the primal one of the force laws, equal and opposite. And force equals mass times acceleration. Leonardo had stressed the mystery of force. In conquering, it destroys itself. Newton computes as if the enigma were not there. But it is. As in Beethoven's last quartet, the most dynamic effect is of one voice leaping through static chords. In the motion of a body, the force we think of as cause cannot be applied until mass times acceleration, its assumed result, meets it in counterforce. Hegel's root antinomy of gravity and spirit lurks in this paradox of inertia, that mass resists motion only by moving. When the sockeye salmon, after a life in the ocean, seeks the high streams of his birth and reproduction, he renounces his life of growth with its desires, gives up feeding, turns from silver to red, and grows the great hooked jaw useful only for his quixotic chivalries. Where streams rush down, he plunges up, fighting and leaping to the pools, not of his own, but of the kind's continuance, a symbol against that falling water of anti-entropy. But when Yeats wrote Sailing to Byzantium, he treated that upward sacrifice as in Aristotle the form of one rank becomes the matter of the next, as the abandoned call of flesh. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, whatever is begotten, born, and dies. Against which, as we turn from Beethoven to Leonin at the spirit center of Byzantine, Romanesque, and Gothic, Yeats invokes the mosaics of Hagia Sophia, sages standing in God's holy fire, for the artifice of eternity. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fasten to a dying animal, it knows not what it is. East becomes such a school of sublimation that the serpent power coiled